I'm Ashley Wiltshire. It is the 27th of March, 2024. And I'm here at the Nashville Bar Association offices to interview for the Legal History Project, Giff Thornton, my good friend and colleague for many years.
Thank you for not saying old friend.
Oh, well, no.
I'm doing this under protest. I don't know what the age restriction or threshold is, but
Well,
I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. So first of all, give your real name, your full name, and then maybe you can explain where Giff came from.
Yeah, it'll take a while.
Right.
There were never enough slots on the NEDT forms to hold all the letters in my name. It's Guilford Fletcher Thornton Jr. And obviously my dad had the same name, and he went by the name Gill. And so when I was a little baby, I was born in Haywood County in Brownsville in West Tennessee. My grandparents on the dad's side were farmers, and many of my family are still there farming in Haywood County. We actually lived in Tipton County in Covington not long after I was born. But the announcement in the local newspaper said he would be called Jeff, Jeff, for some reason, and that's what it was. And I would go back as an older boy to visit old friends in Covington, and they'd call me Jeff. But somewhere along the line, somebody looked at Jeff and Guilford and said, that's not close enough. Let's figure something out. So that they came up with GIF, G-I-F, which is Fig backwards, in case you ever need to remember it, or
Yep, I never thought of that.
Prone to forget it. Once I tell you that, you'll never forget the name. It was a tough day in 5th grade when we were doing names backwards on the blackboard, and that's what mine turned out to be. There was lots of mocking that followed that, and lots of counseling that followed that. And, you know,
well, that solves an age-old problem and question.
There it is.
So I'm glad. Now you've given your father's name. What about your mother?
Anne Dillard Thornton. Her given first name was Vera, and she dropped that like a hot potato when she got married and kept her middle name with her maiden name. But yeah, Anne Thornton. And I married an Anna and have a sister who's a Leanne and a daughter who's an Anna Russell, and my mom is named Anne. So it's very confusing in our home generally.
Well, you sound like you sorted them out.
Yeah, I practice every morning because they get mad when I get their names wrong.
Good. The date, you've given the place of your birth in Haywood County.
Yeah.
The date of your birth.
April 3rd, 1962.
Okay. And then what about, tell me something about your parents and what work they did.
Sure. I told you Dad came from a farming family that had been in Haywood County for some time. In fact, we have a family gathering. We call it camp meeting. It arose out of the Methodist revival movement in the 19th century. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, Howell Taylor, landed in Haywood County, and he had a bunch of boys and they scattered, but he had them come back once a year for revival and for a reunion. And that's been going on since 1826 in Brownsville. So that's Dad's side of the family. And again, farming, cotton farming. Haywood County used to be the largest producing county of cotton in the country outside of Texas. That's with the man-made fibers, you don't see quite as much cotton produced as you used to. But anyway, that was his background. He grew up on the farm, joined the military to avoid having to live the rest of his life on the farm. Had a stint in the Navy and saw the world and learned music. And it was the best thing that ever happened to him, he would say. And he worked into the agricultural chemical business, helping farmers successfully grow their crops. And that led us to Memphis, outside Memphis, Germantown, in the early 60s. Mom's people were from Lake County in the extreme northwest corner of the state. Both Mom's parents were public educators. Grandfather, Bernard Dillard, was a local principal of a grammar school in Tiptonville. and my grandmother taught fifth grade for 50 years. So when Bill Lee ran for governor, and when he was an unknown and a long shot, he had a motorhome, and he drove it all through the state to see all 95 counties. And, I grew up, my dad had a camping center when I was in high school, and so I knew how to drive a big motorhome. And I said, well, we didn't know each other well, but I said, I'll drive you for a day. Where do you want to go? He said, well, I haven't been to West Tennessee, rural West Tennessee. I said, I'm your man. So we drove to Tiptonville, and there was nobody in town. I said, well, you got to go see the lake while you're here. And that's where everybody was. There was some sort of big flea market going on at the lake, and everybody was there, either there at Boyette's having catfish, which is still an iconic restaurant in Tiptonville.
Yeah.
Not much else going on there. So mom and dad met at UT. Dad wrote some kind of profile of what he was looking for in a wife, and prominent was a good dancer. And a friend said, Ann Dillard is somebody you might like, and the rest is history.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. At some point, you moved to Nashville.
Yeah. Dad was friends with Winfield Dunn, and he was a local practicing dentist in Memphis who had been county chair of the Republican Party sometime in the 60s, but had the audacity to run for governor in 1970. And those are, you and I are old enough to remember that that year there was a crowded field of Republicans running in the primary. And it didn't take a majority, a plurality, would deliver the winner. And Shelby County, even with the Democratic population in the city, urban area, the county was and still is the largest Republican voting county in the state. And so Winfield Dunn won Shelby County, and that was a year where between Vietnam and the civil rights movement and busing and other things going on, Tennessee was beginning to shift from its being a entrenched Democratic state to considering Republican candidates. And John J. Hooker was the Republican nominee, and he was, I'm sorry, the Democratic nominee. And he wasn't satisfactory to a lot of the Democrats, so they all crossed over and voted for Winfield Dunn. He was elected. In Tennessee, you appoint your commissioners, and he appointed Dad to be his commissioner of agriculture. And that was a bit of a long shot. They were friends, and that's a whole other story that probably is not what your viewers want to hear. But Dad made the case for it, and the Farm Bureau had another choice. You having had a farm, you know how powerful the Farm Bureau is. Yeah. But Winfield Dunn went for Dad, and we moved thinking we'd just be in Nashville for 4 years, because in those years a governor could not succeed himself or herself in office. And so Governor Dunn did his 4 years, 71 to 75. I was just a little boy, 8, 10, 12 years old. And but by the end of 4 years, we've fallen in love with Nashville and lived in Brentwood, Williamson County, and didn't look back.
Now, I've enjoyed telling my grandkids on the way to Brentwood High School about where you had a farm, your dad,
right,
and that is now a subdivision of big houses. But talk a little bit about life on that.
Sure. Dad, I said he wanted to get off the farm, and so he joined the Navy. But you can't get the farm out of the man altogether. And we found this property, the Hackney Farm, at 23 acres in a small little farmhouse. And Dad and Mom said, let's do it. And so we moved there and lived in the little farmhouse while we built a bigger house for our family of 5, and had 23 acres. And at one point, had cattle. They had, a handful, 5 or 10 cows. And we had the cattle, but we didn't really have the fencing. And so as a 7th grader at Brentwood Academy, when that was a brand new school up Granny White Pike from what became Brentwood High School, many mornings I would have to get up early and get the cows back in the pasture before I went to school. And my family in Brownsville think I'm a city boy that, moved to Nashville and went bad. But, all of my friends at Brentwood Academy thought I was a farmhand because I they saw me out with the bucket getting our bull, whose name was Loner, and he lived up to that name, would wander, way beyond the fence line over to what was then the Brentwood Country Club. And the golf professional would call us regularly and say, "Sir, we need you to come get your bull off the 18th green of the golf course."
So you have your credentials as a farmer.
I think
a
so.
cattleman.
I've got the dirt in my fingernails, and I have chickens now in Forest Hill, so I've returned to those roots, or kept the tradition alive, and a gentleman chicken farmer.
There you go. That's good. Well, let's see. Why don't we talk a little bit about your current family? You talk your
Sure.
wife's full name and your
Sure.
children.
So I met Anna Morrow, who was a Memphis girl, in Nashville after we had both graduated from Vanderbilt. We didn't know each other at Vanderbilt. I graduated 2 years before she did, and she transferred as a rising junior from the University of North Carolina. But a mutual friend or two actually suggested we might be a fit. And so we met actually as both replacements in a Tuesday night tennis game. And I was not a very good tennis player, but Anna Morrow was hot as a firecracker.
Mm.
And I walked out on the court, and there she was, and I went, wow. And she came up, and she said, I said, "Hi, I'm Gift Thornton." And she said, "Well, hi, I'm Anna Morrow, and I like to win." So I was terrified, but I was motivated. And so I scrambled around and returned enough shots, and we won that night. So I got a date not long after that. And after an up and down 2 or 3 years of courtship, we tied the knot in 1992. So coming up on 32 years. And we have 4 children. Anna Russell, our oldest, and then 3 boys, Richard and Cole and John. When you have a name like Guilford, parentheses Gift, you name your children John and Richard.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Exactly.
And just real quickly, what are those children doing now?
Well, they're all adults. Anna Russell is and just returned to Nashville last fall after 7 years in Houston teaching school at a public charter school in a southeastern part of Houston. She went to college at Washington and Lee, and is just a terrific academic scholar. Also could have been a great politician, and we'll talk some about politics and my involvement there. But the road forked, and she chose academia and left behind politics, much to her father's. Actually, it's probably relief, but she did 7 years teaching, and then she was ready to move back to Nashville, ready to have a change. She wasn't burned out, and she may yet return to teaching, but she had a lot of opportunities. But she landed at our law firm at Adams and Reese, directing our efforts on associate development and recruiting. In particular, trying to use the skills that she developed as a teacher to try to get inside the heads of today's young lawyer, to see how we match up their goals and ambitions with the law practice, so we can retain talent and raise up the next generation of partners. So I get to see her every day, which is great fun. Richard, our next one, oldest son, is in healthcare here in Nashville. He went to UVA college, and he's a hard-charging business guy. Cole went to Davidson College, and he is in graduate school at UT doing a landscape architecture master's. He's an outdoorsman, a tree lover, animal lover, nature lover, and appreciates beauty. And so that'll give him a trade that can match up with that. And then John the Caboose is our creative artist singer and a songwriter. And he is a senior at the University of Southern California, graduating this spring, actually with a degree out of the business school. He's an artist, and he's passionate about his craft in that regard, but he doesn't want to starve. And so he's got a business degree, I think, to not hedge his bets, but to give him, something. I think hopefully it'll be attractive to people in the entertainment business to have somebody who's creative like they are, but also has some business chops. So good. That's where the kids are.
Great.
Yeah.
Now let's jump back.
Okay.
You mentioned you went to Vanderbilt,
Mm-hmm.
and any good advice or particularly memorable things about your undergraduate? And
Yeah, it was a, so I graduated in 1984, so 80 to 84, and had a really great experience at Vanderbilt. I'd been dumped by my high school girlfriend the spring beforehand, so I was kind of bummed out a lot of my freshman year, but that wasn't Vanderbilt's fault. I found a lane of traffic. I had an interesting day. I'd go to class in the morning. I was a trainer for the football team. And that was during a 2 or 3 year stretch where Vanderbilt was competitive. George McIntyre was the coach and Watson Brown was the offensive coordinator, and had an offense that was novel and a lot of the SEC defenses hadn't adjusted to. And we went to a bowl game my freshman year, the Hall of Fame Bowl in Birmingham. I was a trainer for the football team, so we did that every afternoon. And then most of the time I was in a play. Theater was my thing, in addition to being around football for that freshman year anyway. And that was just great. You couldn't ask for a more diverse combination of people to be around. But I found that to be enriching and delightful, and I learned a lot from both of them. Ended up evolving out of the theater was pretty demanding. If you're going to do that, you really couldn't do much else. And similarly, the football thing, ran its course, and student government is what I did mostly in terms of my extracurricular activities at Vanderbilt. And that was a fun time. It was a different time, in the early 80s. I mean, President Reagan had just been elected in the fall of 1980, and what was we can talk more about, the formative influences, but Vanderbilt was pretty conservative university. Student body was pretty conservative. I would say the college Republicans were bigger than the college Democrats in those years. And I was in, all the student government stuff and enjoyed that very much. I majored in political science, and that may lead to, thinking about law school. And I'll tell my story has 2 distinct chapters of critical advice. When I was busy on campus. I wasn't thinking all that much about next things. But people assumed that I would go to law school because I'd done theater, and so I was comfortable on my feet and in being in front of people like a litigator would. And I liked government and the making of laws and all of that, and politics. And I just would suggest, you're heading to law school. The truth is, I wasn't that much of an academic, and I wasn't really sure that's what I wanted to do in terms of being a lawyer. And the key professor on campus, at least in the political science department in those years, was a man named Robert Berkby. He taught constitutional interpretation, something upper class political science course that was, if you're going to go to law school, that was part of the protocol. I never took the class. I did become friends with Berkby. I was doing a legislative internship with Leeper Freeman was my professor, who had me doing political things. But I was friends with Berkby, and so I sought his advice about law school. And he said, Thornton, does the idea of curling up with a good law book every night before bed, really turn you on? Is that what you really want to be about? And the answer was no.
Yeah.
And he said, well, you don't need to go to law school. And so I didn't go. And Procter & Gamble came on campus and offered a sales job with a company car and $19,000. And man, I thought that was awesome. So that was it as far as, that season of thinking about law school. I'll tell you when you're ready about what the advice that ultimately turned me back to law school.
Now, when did that?
That was 3 years later.
3 years. All right. So let's work toward that.
Yeah.
So you had experience as a legislative intern, and then right after college, so tell us what you did.
Well, a couple of things there. The legislative intern followed an experience in high school with the YMCA Youth and Government program, where you put on a mock legislature, and I did that, and I thought that was intoxicating. I really thought that was fun. And then in college, you have TISL, Tennessee Intercollegiate State Legislature, which is really the same thing, and I did that. but then did a dedicated semester as an employee at the General Assembly. I worked for Jim Henry, who's still living. He was at that time the Republican leader of the House of Representatives, minority leader of the House of Representatives. He was from Kingston in East Tennessee. He was and is a really good guy. He had a career after that, ran for governor and was the state party chair at one point, was Bill Haslam's deputy when he was governor later on. So anyway, I enjoyed that very much, and got more exposure to how the legislative process works. So that was influential. But Vanderbilt has a program where every year they take somebody from the graduating class and they put them on the board of trust. And so I did that beginning in 1984, and that was a rich experience. In those years, Vanderbilt was their board was populated largely with Nashvillians. It was at a time when Vanderbilt was highly esteemed, but it very much had a Nashville flavor to it, and the board reflected that. It was at an era where the business leaders of the Nashville community could fit, maybe not in this room, but in a conference room, at a law firm. If you were to say who are the top 20 business leaders in Nashville, you could rattle them off. The bank presidents, the head of the biggest law firms, the president of Vanderbilt or Belmont, or whatever, and almost all of those people. People like Pat Wilson, people like Bronson Ingram, people like Nelson Andrews, were all on the Vanderbilt board, and I got exposed to them as a 22 fresh graduate, young alumni trustee, and that was really rich. I met John Beasley, who I'll tell you about. He was the vice chancellor for development at the time, and we've remained friends all these years. So anyway, while I'd taken a job with Procter & Gamble, I was back in Nashville twice a year, coming to board meetings. Joe Rogers, going back to politics, was a local businessman who had gotten involved nationally in Republican politics. And he was the chair of the finance committee for Ronald Reagan's re-election campaign in 1984. And that was a successful effort. And the president offered him the ambassadorship of France after that election. And he went. And you fast forward to the next summer, I'm minding my business in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, selling shampoo and home perms, lilt home perms. You need a home perm.
You're the guy.
You're the guy. And Jan Rogers, who actually was the person who introduced Anna and me, however many years later, called. We were high school friends, and she called and said, hypothetically, if my dad had an opportunity for a special assistant to work with him in Paris, would you be interested? And I said, yes. When can I start? And that eventuated. So I spent 1986 in Paris working for Joe Rogers as assistant to the ambassador. It's a shame to peak when you're 24 years old. But,
Now, did you know French?
I knew more than he did. That was key. He was from Bay Minette, Alabama, and could barely speak English. And French was a real chore. To his credit, he had a tutor, and he devoted an hour a day out of his schedule to his French tutor. And he said it was his toughest hour of work every day. But he was great. He was so generous, and I mean, he put me to work. I was a speechwriter. I tell you, couldn't speak English. He put an R at the end of words like issue and window. Imagine trying to write speeches for a politician and not being able to use the word issue. But I had taken French in school and I had traveled. And so I picked it up. My ear caught up quickly. My vocabulary was always limited, but a year there, you can get around pretty well. That was great fun. And Vanderbilt was nice enough to fly me back to board meetings. So I was able to stay in touch with those folks.
So how long did that last?
That ended at the end of the year 1986. I was the victim of a budget cut. Let's see, President Reagan was in his second term. I don't know if that's when the SNL, one of the real estate driven economic downturns happened, and it was a belt tightening time. And Joe Rogers was a businessman, and he practiced what he preached in terms of, spending less than you make every day. That was one of my dad's mantras: spend a little less than you make every day. And so he needed to cut his budget. And my main project, in addition to doing the speech writing, was the 100th anniversary of the Statue of Liberty, which was a gift from the people of France to America in 1886. So 1986, 100th anniversary. You may remember we refurbished, Lee Iacocca led a fundraising effort, and they refurbished the statue in New York. And there was a version of it, a smaller replica in Paris on the Seine River that they also refurbished. And we just used it as a symbol of the friendship between the two countries. And my job was to put on an event somewhere every day to say thank you from the people of America to the people of France. So that was great fun. So, but that ended once that came to a close, and then the budget tightening happened, and it was like, maybe it's time for me to come back home. So I did. That would have been spring of '87.
So you're back in this country now. What do you do?
Yeah, now it's that's a great question. It was then, and my the options were I could go to work for my dad in what was then either the real estate business or the automobile business. And I didn't want to be in sales, and I didn't want to work for my dad. And my dad was kind of an entrepreneur, a risk taker. He'd grown up on the farm without much in the way of money, and he wasn't worried about losing whatever he had. My mom was, and I think I channeled my mom's stress. So one of the reasons I think in hindsight I gravitated towards law was to have a trade, have something that I knew would be appealing, and that there would be a market for it, and I could have a job. Literally. I also liked air conditioning, but Jim Mathis is my lifelong best friend. We started going to school together in 4th grade. Did grammar school, went to academy together, went to Vanderbilt together, and we had stayed in touch. He was teaching school at the time, teaching Latin and Greek as taught to him by a woman named Susan Wiltshire at Vanderbilt.
A very good teacher.
Outstanding teacher. And he was in Hendersonville, I think, at that time, teaching Latin. And he was ready for something else. And I didn't want to go to work with my dad. And well, what about law school? It's like, law school. So who do I ask for advice now? It's John Beasley, who had been the assistant dean of the law school years and years ago at Vanderbilt, and had risen to be vice chancellor for development. And who was really he was the face of Vanderbilt, the relationship guy there. It made everybody feel good, particularly Nashvillians, as Vanderbilt grew and expanded its reach. And so I went to see John Beasley, and his advice, which has stuck with me, which I've repeated innumerable times over the years, was law school is the only graduate school that opens more doors than it closes. That has really proven true for me. And it led me to go. I didn't know that I wanted to be a lawyer. It wasn't like curling up with a law book was any more attractive at 25 than it was at 21. But the thought of doing something that would be moving me forward and not limiting me was appealing. And it led to a trade, if you will. So then it's like, okay, let's go to law school. Well, it was the spring of 1987 by now. And Jim and I, he said, I'll go if you go. And I said, okay, where should we go? And we should go to Vanderbilt. And Vanderbilt was affordable in those years. It wasn't like making the kind of financial decision it would be now. It was single digits, thousands of dollars, maybe less than 5 even a year. So we went to see Ann Brandt, who is the admissions director at that time, and Bob Brandt's wife, who's a former chancellor. And she was admissions dean at Vanderbilt. And, to her everlasting credit, she gave us a meeting for heaven's sakes. I mean, who were we? But we went and sat with her and made enough of an impression that she said, well, you know, what did you do on the LSAT? I said, well, we hadn't taken the LSAT yet. She said, okay, well, maybe you ought to go take that test because it's a requirement. Fill out the application and get it turned in. I think we're past the deadline, but you know, if you'll take care of that, we'll take a look. Thankfully, Jim and I both scored well on the LSAT and turned in an application, and by George, she admitted both of us. It meant I had to resign my last year as a trustee on the board, and I've wondered if maybe the fact that I was on the board had some influence in my getting it. But I've always appreciated Ann. I don't think that was it. I think she just took a chance on us. I think, and that was a different era too. Can you imagine having that kind of latitude in her office to make that kind of a risk, a judgment call to say, yeah, I think those guys have got something. Let's put them in a spot.
When the date for application had passed and everything.
Yeah.
But that was imaginative on her part.
Right. Of course, I'm Presbyterian, so I think that was preordained, and God, with his sovereign power, ordered all affairs to make that happen. But I'm grateful for Ann Brent, however it came about. And we went, you know, and I loved law school. I wasn't I approached law school like working. I'd been out for 3 years, had been working. I always worked throughout school. I didn't really apply myself to making the grades. Maybe I don't really have that aptitude, or maybe it just wasn't what I really wanted to be about. But what I remember, I had a couple of close friends, or professors who've become close friends. Jim Blumstein is a con law professor and a healthcare specialist, and I took 2 or 3 classes from him and appreciated that. He was also the moderator for Leadership Nashville. And through a strange set of circumstances, I was in Leadership Nashville my first year of law school. We can talk about that if you want. But he was great. And David Partlett was the torts professor. He had young children, lived in Franklin, and I would house sit for him periodically. He was Australian and would go home with some regularity. So he became dean at WNL, and then I think at Emory later on. So a couple of good relationships with professors, and then and others. Sue Kay, who ran the clinic, and others. But the main thing is we had 180 people in our class, 2 sections of 90 in those years, and man, they were all smart and going places, you know. And it was just so rich to be in that kind of community, not from a competitive sense. It really wasn't that competitive in an environment. It was just, I like you. I'm drawn to you because you're about something. You clearly got some intelligence, and you're about something. So Vanderbilt had that kind of reputation. I think they've held on to that, to be an excellent law school for training young lawyers, but not in a cutthroat, competitive, tear the page out of the law book so the next guy can't read it, you know, sort of place.
Now, when you were in law school, you started clerking.
Yeah. Stokes and Bartholomew was the law firm that I got a clerkship with my first summer. And by the time we got into the early 90s, the economy had improved, and law firms were hiring first-year lawyers. But when the economy is down, law firms tend to eliminate their first-year programs. When the economy is good, they can take a risk and hire the first year. So Stokes and Bartholomew had a program, and Sam Bartholomew was the chair of the firm. He was a person that was involved in Republican politics. He'd known my dad from my dad's years in state government, and again, that board of trustee network of relationships. I'm convinced Nelson Andrews got me in Leadership Nashville at that young age. I'm sure, you know, who knows who Luke Connor, you know, may have helped me get in at Stokes and Bartholomew because I knew him from that experience. Anyway, Sam gave me a job, and that's the only firm I've ever worked for. Second summer, I had an offer to split with Birch, Porter, and Johnson in Memphis. I think about how life would have been different. I grew up, I lived in Germantown as a kid. My wife grew up in Memphis. Could have easily moved back to Memphis and had a life there. But, you know, by that point, we were pretty settled in Nashville and went back to Stokes and Bartholomew. But man, all my eggs were in that basket. It was, you know, if they had not offered, I would have been, you know, on the street somewhere.
I don't think, I don't think, but it all worked so well.
Yeah.
So talk about your early days as a lawyer.
Yeah. So 1990 is when I graduated. And in those years, graduating law students didn't say, hey, I want to do transactions or I want to do litigation. It was, I want a job. The law firm hired you and you just went where the work was. At least that was my experience. And I think my observation generally, the hyper specialization, if it had started, was only just beginning. Even among practicing attorneys, I can think of titans of the bar at that time who weren't limited to one lane of traffic as practitioners, like they seem to be more so now. But in those years, we had the airport authority, is a longtime client of Stokes and Bartholomew, now as Reese, and that was a big time. American Airlines had established a hub in Nashville, and that had launched the building of a new terminal, and that obviously creates a lot of need for legal help. And Kirk Schaefer was our partner. We were the outside general counsel for the airport authority. Kirk had an office there, and I had a table in Kirk's office. And I was out there 2 or 3 days a week. And then it was also a heavy time for bankruptcy activity with 2 big clients, General Motors Acceptance Corporation and Fidelity Federal, which became Union Planners, which became, Regents, maybe, the family tree of what was Fidelity Federal. But I did Chapter 7 meetings of creditors for those 2 clients. And that was a great experience for learning how to practice law. There's nothing in law school that really teaches you how to practice law. And I've been on stage, I've done all this public speaking, but until you stand in front of a judge or even a trustee to put a sentence together, you hadn't done it yet. And it was terrifying. But I have great memories because the bar was so collegial. In those years, I don't know if it's still that way, the bankruptcy bar was tight. It was close-knit. It was a dozen or so people who were in all the cases. And in these meetings of creditors, it'd be one after another, and you'd have a day's worth of dockets. And so I'd be opposite the same plaintiff's attorneys or debtors' attorneys on most of the matters. I'd be alongside the same creditors' attorneys on most of the matters, and we just got to be friends. And some of the older ones really taught me how to practice. People like John McLemore, Bob Walschmidt, Rogers, David Rogers. These were trustees. They were judges, but they weren't really judges. And the other Herman Lowenstein, who became somebody you and I came to know, had clients over there. And, you just felt like you were a real lawyer. A lot of the times what I ended up doing was government relations work or regulatory practice. Sometimes you don't feel like you're a real lawyer. Well, doing that bankruptcy work, I felt like I was really practicing law. So just learned a lot. I wasn't built for litigation. I'm not that.
But early on, you did have one personal injury.
Oh yeah, my first big win early on. And who knows how this referral came in, but a lady had something happen with a meal she had bought, and somehow it got handed down to me. And in the years when I was starting out, we still had letterhead, and you still had all the names of the lawyers on the letterhead listed in order of seniority. And I was number 28 in a 28 lawyer firm for about 3 years. But anyway, this case came to me, and I sat with her, and she told me that she had just had some very expensive dental work done, and that she had gone to the barbecue restaurant and gotten a to-go meal, had gone home and bit into her sandwich and broke her dental work. And she was sure that it was because there was something wrong with the sandwich. And I was a little skeptical. I said, how are we going to prove that? And so I said, do you have any evidence? And she said, well, sure. And so she opened her purse and pulled out a Ziploc bag with a clump of barbecue in it with the zipper, a buckle of a zipper embedded in the barbecue. And I said, ma'am, I think I'm gonna be able to help you.
Even I, even I.
Competent as I am, I think I can get you, think we can win, or I can get you a satisfactory settlement, and we did. I called, and they were initially, resistant. I said, you couldn't do a screenshot with a cell phone back then, but it's fine. When you see what I've got, you're not gonna want this to be on the front page of the newspaper. So they settled out. That's funny.
Well, now talk about how you did then eventually get into government relations. Because that's where you really.
Yeah. I think a lot of young lawyers have the same experience where you trudge for 2, 3, 4 years starting out, wandering around among different practice areas, having experiences, but not really feeling like you know what you're doing, or that that you're comfortable holding yourself out as a professional, much less an expert. And one of the risks of bouncing around between the airport and the bankruptcy court and doing the personal injury small claims litigation is that 3 years in, I was kind of still a first year attorney, because I wasn't really developing any depth of expertise, and I really felt that way, and I wasn't really built for litigation, and the airport work kind of ebbed and flowed, and it's like, wow, that I'm not really sure where this is leading, and candidly, I don't think my partners at Adams and Reese, other than Stokes and Bartholomew, knew where I was heading. But a couple of good things happened. We got the opportunity through Sam to represent Bell South. In those years, Bell South was one of the monopoly providers in a region of local telephone service. And they were regulated at the state level by what was then the Public Service Commission, later the Tennessee Regulatory Authority. And that was big business. Other firms had that work. In this time period, competition was coming. The breakup of the AT&T monopoly, the breakup of the Bell South, what they called the R-Box monopolies around the country were happening. And cellular phone companies were emerging and wanted to compete for local service with these incumbent providers. And Bell South needed to get ready for that. So they formed a long distance company, because in those years, the Bell South couldn't provide long distance. That was all AT&T. They created a company to do competing service, where they would go in somebody else's territory and provide local telephone service. They had a publishing entity that printed the Yellow Pages. Anyway, they wanted separate counsel from their local telephone company lawyer to represent those new entities, and we got hired. And that involved being at the legislature and being at least tangential to what was going on with the telephone company. It certainly involved being at the state regulatory authority called the Public Service Commission. And so that was a toe in the door in the government relations world. And then not long after that, Governor McWhorter, who was in office at that time, introduced TennCare, the Medicaid replacement program. Tennessee was a pilot project to try to introduce managed care principles into the care for Medicaid eligible population. A large drug company called Pfizer, pharmaceutical company, wanted to be involved in that process of creating this entity and engaging the decision makers. And Bill West, who was a lawyer at Stokes and Bartholomew, who did a healthcare practice and mostly doing certificates of need. And he had been the exec for the State Healthcare Facilities Commission after being at Legal Aid.
A good start.
Highlight of his career,
right?
Being at Legal Aid, of course. But he said, we gotta have somebody that go over the legislature and see what's going on and into the executive branch. I said that I'd love to take a swing at that. And so that's what I did. And they paid us on an hourly basis to go there and figure that out. And I mean, figure it out. I mean, Governor McWhorter introduced the program and left office, I think, in 86, 87. Governor Sundquist was elected. Bob Corker was his finance commissioner. And TennCare was by then it was I won't say it was a disaster. That's no disrespect to what Governor McCoy started. The program is still here and it's relatively healthy. But it's a fourth of the state budget. So it was spending a lot of money and they didn't feel like they had control of it. So Bob Corker brought it all under the Department of Finance. So as a young lawyer, I was, contending with Bob Corker and Don Sundquist and on behalf of a pharmaceutical company, Pine. And that got me started and it whet my appetite. I said, okay, I think this is worth trying to go for. San Bartholomew had a political identity. I thought, we represent the airport authority, these other public companies, companies that are involved in the governmental area. Let's build a real government relations practice instead of just having some kid, and in came Bill Bruce. This is just a pivotal moment in my professional life. Bill had been a state senator from Shelby County and had retired voluntarily from the Senate and had made enough relationships in Nashville that he moved to Nashville and brought up government. By then he had a government relations practice doing lobbying at the state legislature. He was in his 60s. He was a Democrat and I was in my 30s and was Republican, and the state was pretty balanced. We had a Republican governor about now, right? So we offered, he was at the old Baker Worthington firm that was getting ready to merge into High School Donaldson to make Baker Donaldson. And somehow that wasn't working out for him. So he was available. And thank God he was. So we were able to recruit him and he led our government relations practice. And he was the smartest guy in the room. And he was the most ethical person I've ever worked with. And he was the hardest working guy that I ever worked for. So it was intimidating and it was impossible to live up to that precedent or that standard, but he had he had a terrific record of success and he did it all the right way. And you think about all you hear about lobbyists and people that work in that realm and the kind of character that you sometimes stereotype that person with. And Bill Bruce was just the opposite. He's just one of the finest people I've ever known. And that's the standard he set. So I've tried to follow that in my career. But we had a great run and that led me into a niche. It works out. Lawyers end up in your lane of traffic, and that proved to be my lane of traffic. And I was able to get some of my own clients over the years and grow, made partner 1997. Got a parking spot in the building sometime after that, which was really the most important promotion. We were in the Fifth Third Financial Center, what had been the Third National Financial Center, and then the SunTrust Financial Center became the Fifth Third Financial Center. That's where I was for about 35 years. And we had to park down 4th Avenue and we got rained on, as an associate, and even as a young partner. But
having that parking place is important.
Yeah. At some point I got a parking place in the building. That's when I knew I was somebody.
So we're back, and you're made partner at Stokes and Bartholomew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what happens with the firm?
Yeah. So, we were a good general service, commercial law firm in the, I think the firm was founded in the late 70s. So we went through the 80s and 90s. But then the evolution of law practice really encroached on our lifestyle. I think you see what's happened in the retail world where Walmart has come in and grown, and it's a one-stop shop and you can get everything you want there. And you got Walmart and you have specialty boutiques where if you want one thing and you need really great service or you want a certain quality that may not be available at Walmart, or a bigger variety of that one thing, you can go to a specialty boutique. But the mid-sized retailers like JCPenney or Harvey's, Kane Sloan or Casmanot, are all gone, right? So that's not really too far from my opinion of what's happened with law practice over the last 25 years. Stokes and Bartholomew was one of the 10 biggest firms in Nashville, but some things started to happen, and Batsbury and Sims was getting bigger and bigger. Waller Lanston was getting bigger and bigger. Bolt Cummings would be third, And then there was a significant drop off, and then you had the boutiques that were rising up that did one thing really well, like I described. So competing, as a mid-sized general service firm was becoming more of a challenge. Sam was our dominant leader, and that's the greatest thing I could ever say about Stokes Bartholomew. But in the early part of the 2000s, we were starting to struggle, and it appeared to us younger partners that Sam was struggling to try to figure out what to do next as far as leading the law firm in the future. And ability to look back now, I know that he had early onset dementia because Sam ultimately developed full-blown Alzheimer's and passed away several years ago. But at that time, we just thought he was not responding to, the trends and much less getting out ahead of it, which is ironic because he was always ahead of the curve. He was way out in front of marketing as a law practice, more like a business. And so it was sad on a variety of fronts for his career to end that way. At the same time, you had the regionalization of law firms happening. You had firms that were multi-state, that were building and growing on that sort of a model of if not one-stop shops on everything you could want, at least, hey, you use us in Nashville. I bet you have got needs in Atlanta and in Dallas and Tampa, same firm, we can take care of you. So that started happening. Gilbert and Milam, Harris Gilbert's firm, merged into Wyatt Tarrant Combs, Louisville-based regional firm, what became a regional firm. Charlie Warfield's Ferris Warfield in Canada merged into Stites Harbison, another Kentucky headquartered firm. So it's like, okay, these are some titans of the industry in Nashville that are making those sorts of choices. Some of us younger partners got on the bandwagon that's what we ought to do. Chuck Adams, who was the managing partner of Adams and Reese, which was a firm headquartered originally out of New Orleans, that was working on a strategic plan that had identified Nashville as a place that wanted to go. And that was attractive. They had a clear strategy for their law firm, and they had clearly were investing in leadership. And where we were, Sam was waning as a leader, and we didn't have any real strategy because he was our dominant leader. So there wasn't, without Sam, it wasn't clear what we were going to do next. So I got appointed to the committee. All the standing we had originally was the title the committee, the study committee, Mitch Bolton, Cindy Barnett, and I. And we got started, considering what we ought to do, entertaining this conversation with Chuck Adams. And somewhere along the line, we became persuaded that the regional practice was the way to go. Chuck probably oversold it a little bit. His theory was that, not only would the mid-sized firms that are trying to general practice won't have a real prosperous future, but he said the indigenous big firms that, are just one state firms will be out of business. So a firm like Bass, Berry & Sims. And it's like, well, 25 years later, Bass, Berry & Sims doing just fine, better than ever maybe. But a lot of the firms that were in that middle tier then do not exist, or either because they merged or because they went out of business. So he was prophetic in a certain sense. So we decided to do a deal, but then we said, Chuck, where you've sold us that we need to join a regional firm. We're just not sure it's Adams and Reese. We don't know what the other options are. So we set out hired a consultant and set out to look at other alternatives and talked seriously to what was then Frost Brown Todd. I may have that name wrong because that has merged since then with a Cincinnati firm to create a different firm, but another Kentucky firm, and then Miller & Martin, which itself was the product of an acquisition of the Tribune Stewart & DeWitt firm by Chattanooga-based Miller and Martin some years prior to that. So you had Gilbert and Milam, you had Miller and Martin, you had Stites, and then we came along right along after that, and ultimately decided to do the deal with Adams and Reese. And that was 2005. So I made partner in 97. In that 8-year period to 2005, all those market dynamics were changing, and our situation at Stokes and Bartholomew led us to make that move. And it was, we've had a great run at Adams and Reese. Not everybody came with us, and I have some colleagues. I saw Bo Campbell yesterday at a luncheon. He went on to Waller after we made that decision. Paul Davidson did as well. So not everybody joined us at Adams and Reese, but most folks did. And we've rebuilt the office and based on the strategic direction we wanted to go as a firm. And one of the attributes of Adams and Reese that was appealing to us, in addition to strategy and good management, was the opportunity for new people to have a voice. And I tell people that on day one, I had more influence at Adams and Reese, which was a 200 lawyer regional firm, than I ever had at Stokes and Bartholomew, because Sam Bartholomew ran Stokes and Bartholomew, and there were others who were on the board at that little firm, and I wasn't really in the room where it mattered there.
But the three of you very early on got into the
we did. Adams and Reese wanted Nashville to feel fully integrated into the bigger law firm. And Chuck always said, we learned something from every merger we did. And finding good lawyers to join the firm via merger is relatively easy. Finding good leaders is harder. And so we're always looking for good leaders. So they had 3 positions: executive committee, which is our board of directors. They were willing to expand the size of the board temporarily to take on a Nashville member. And then we have practice group leaders who are our operational vice presidents of the law firm, and then the partner in charge of the office. Those are the 3 leadership roles that were out there. And I was the junior member of our 3. Cindy Barnett was our leader, and Mitch was senior to me. And Cindy was going to go on the executive committee, and Mitch was going to be a practice group leader, and I was going to be the pick in Nashville, we call it pick. Well, at the 11th hour before the merger closed, Cindy came to me and said she had a young family, and there was going to be some travel involved in serving on the executive committee. She said, "I don't want to do that. Let me be the pick, which is a local job. You take the spot on the EC and take on the travel." And so I said, okay. What else was I going to say to Cindy? So that's what we did. So I found myself kind of being on the board of the Vanderbilt at a young age. Early at Adams and Reese, here I am on the executive committee in the boardroom where we're making the big decisions. And of course, I loved it.
Power.
Yeah, absolutely.
Influence.
Corrupts, absolutely. But yeah, so was on the board for, I think we had a 1.5 years time before that position went away. And then, our culture is, like I said, pretty receptive to new people. And I wanted to serve again, and ran, as soon as I was eligible, and got elected, and, served a couple of terms. And then, one thing, just to continue on that story, one thing led to another. And when it was time for Chuck to retire, the leadership came to me to follow him. And so I've been in that job 9 years.
9 years.
9 years as managing partner.
Wow.
Right.
Now, is there a bit of travel involved in that?
That's an interesting dynamic. The short answer is yes. We've got 19 offices. We're in 10 states. We go as far west now as Denver, but Texas through the southeast up to Washington. We joke that our strategic growth plan follows wherever Southwest flies. So the good news is, living in Nashville, I have access to a lot of Southwest flights, and I can go to Houston and Tampa and Jacksonville and New Orleans, places like that, Washington, very easily. So, the routine in my years has been, I'm somewhere 3 weeks out of 4, and 2 days, in a week, really one night. I can get on a Southwest flight in the morning and be in one of those cities and work a full day, spend the night, work the next day, get on an late afternoon, evening flight and be home. And that's, that's
See
been the
your
routine.
chickens. Take care of your chickens.
Yeah, I see my chickens, right. Chuck worked out of Jackson, Mississippi, and that was more central in our footprint. And he liked to drive. He would drive to New Orleans and to Baton Rouge and to Memphis and Birmingham. For me, most of the, with the exception of Memphis and Birmingham, I need to be flying. And so I think the expectations for my travel were a little less. And those expectations were impacted by COVID. The combination of COVID and then the technology of the virtual meeting has dramatically changed our expectations with respect to travel. I mean, our offices are populated. We depopulated early on, like everybody else did, but we repopulated in the summer of 2020. And have been back ever since, and thankfully are not dealing with that sort of crisis of how do you get your people to come back to the office. But the advent and the acceleration of this technology, where you can have a pretty high quality conversation with somebody sitting in another city via Teams, is such that I just don't have to get on the plane as much as I used to, and I can get more work done that way. It's a balancing act to get it right.
Talk a little bit about the way you see the culture of your firm and what you want people to feel and believe and practice.
Well, we are, on the one hand, we look a lot like a lot of other law firms, and we're in the process of a rebranding effort right now. We're trying to come up with something that's unique, that's distinctive, that separates us. And when you get down to it, the services we provide look a lot like Bradley Arad and Burford and Holland and Knight. So what are the particulars? The distinctives for us, I think, begin with community. We use a lot of C words. Culture. We really collaborate among each other. The whole DNA for our strategic business growth is that we're going to become partners and friends. You're a good lawyer. I'm a good lawyer. I'm going to trust my best clients to your expertise. You're going to trust yours to mine. And together we're going to attract more business than either of us would do if we were not together. So we attract people that you want to practice with, that you want to be friends with, that you want to get old with. I recruit by saying, who do you want to get old with? You can practice in a dozen different settings that all look very similar, but the question is, who are the people you want to be around? So we're transparent with our data. We have an open system. All the partners have access to all the data. So we don't, that's risky because you're always you could compare yourself to the gal next door in terms of what you get paid, what you're producing. But on balance, we think it elicits trust. Our comp system includes a subjective overlay. We look at a lot of data, mathematical calculations of performance, but we have a comp committee where we take 8 of our best people and put them in a room and say, here's the available money, make a fair allocation, of the available money for raises, looking forward. So, it puts a premium on trusting the people that you work with. The people who are happiest at our firm are the ones who get to know their partners and enjoy that process, and are willing to open themselves up to being used by their partners and letting their partners have access to their clients. We really disfavor hoarding anything, or we like to share. Very fundamental.
Well, you also talked about avoiding mandates and that how you work the process of getting back to the office, which I thought was really helpful.
Thank you. That's personal to me. COVID is a great example. You know, we followed the guidance to go home. But as the guidance evolved, it was 6 feet of separation and, you know, washing your hands regularly. And we started thinking about, well, in our office, we're rarely within 6 feet of another person unless we're conferring with a partner or working with a staffer. And when you are, you can put the mask on and you'll enjoy a reasonable amount of protection. Even in the early days where we didn't really know the risks of what was going on. So, you know, we had gone home. I started percolating the idea, what if we just invite people back and just, you know, follow the protocols? You know, stay 6 feet away. If you're within 6 feet, put a mask on, wash your hands regularly. But the key thing was, you know, rather than saying you must come back, you know, why not say, look, here's what we'll do if you can't, you know, if you do come back, here's how to help all of us. I like the moral suasion of persuading a colleague that something that's the right thing to do rather than using my office to try to force somebody to do something. I think partners are happier when they feel like they have some dominion over their decision making. And I think you can get, you know, you talk about getting somewhere with honey rather than a stick or whatever the cliche is. Also, you know, as you're trying to understand the psyche of the next generation or the 2 or 3 generations now coming along I think I want to avoid working with people who have to be told every little thing to do. I really want people to have good judgment. The whole premise of a law education is to teach you to spot issues, teach you to think, teach you to solve problems, to discern what the real issues are in a fact pattern. It's judgment. That's what clients pay for. They want advocacy and they want trusted counsel. All of that involves judgment. So don't put me in a position of telling you every little thing to do or not do. Use your good judgment. I'm going to try to give you as much latitude as I can and not encumber you with a big policy manual beyond what is necessary. And there are some things that are necessary, but to use your good judgment, you know, do the things your grandmother would be happy about, or whatever your memory is of the right thing to do and the source of that teaching, you know, call on that, apply that to your daily life in the law firm. And I think the results are a lot better than trying to, you know, mandate or prescribe every little thing that you're looking for. I think that leads to a bland, colorless life and oppressive sort of existence. Yeah.
Well, we've had a good talk about law firm life and management. Let's talk now about your activities in the community.
Sure.
And then we'll get to politics,
Yeah.
Which you've done a lot of work in. So talk about what organizations you've been involved in and working.
Well, the 2 things that you're not supposed to talk about in polite company are the 2 things I'm interested in: law and religion, politics and religion. So I grew up in church and have been active in our Presbyterian church in Nashville, and have served on our leadership is a session of elders, is the moniker we carry, and so that's been an area where I've always just been involved, just trying to shepherd and to love, encourage the people who are in our flock there in the church, and you know, be a positive force for good in the community through the church. That has led to involvement with a seminary, actually in St. Louis, Covenant Theological Seminary. It's the official seminary of the Presbyterian Church in America, and my pastor, now 10 plus years ago, suggested that I might be a good addition there, and so I've done that for the last 10 years and enjoyed that as an extension. Really, it's related to the church work. So, you know, those 2 things. Business leadership, I've done a variety of things in the chamber and bar over the years. You know, I was active in the Nashville bar in the 90s, young Young Lawyers Division president, and enjoyed those years. Got to know Alan Ramser as the first the Nashville bar exec, and then later when he was the Tennessee bar executive director. He basically recruited me to work on things that he was interested in either of those roles. So I've enjoyed that over the years. We actually represent the bar as its advocate at the state level in front of state government. Brad Lampley and handles that. Ashley Harvin handle that work now on a daily basis. But bar activity was always an important thing that led to some great opportunities to work on the effort to retain some semblance or residue of merit selection in the way we choose appellate judges, and I'm proud of that work, and I think what we have is better than what a lot of states have. And, the way our attorney general is appointed is something that is unique, literally, and I think very favorable, and I've worked to keep that in place. And then Governor Lee asked me to lead the council that advises him on appellate appointments, the committee that interviews applicants and recommends 3 nominees for his ultimate selection, and did that for a number of years. And that was very satisfying. So I've made friends with appellate judges in the state as part of my community activity. And then the Tennessee Business Leadership Council was an entity that I had a hand in creating. Now that's 5 or 6 years ago. Governor Haslam, as he was leaving office, said, there needs to be a different sort of business voice to assist whoever the governor is, whatever his party, her party is, with advancing, trying to find that overlap between what the governor wants to do and what business leadership employers think is a good idea, and help equip the governor to be successful when the governor proposes something you agree with, to quietly behind the scenes, not so much of an advocacy or a lobbying group, but just a kitchen cabinet type role with the governor. And so we formed the TBLC, Tennessee Business Leadership Council, and recruited 40 or so of C-suite CEOs of the biggest companies, or the companies with the biggest interests in the state, from across the state to serve. And I think that's been helpful, and Governor Lee would say that has been helpful. I did my term as chair, and now John Ingram is leading that effort. So, that sort of civic work is important.
Well, now the thing closest to my heart is your involvement with the Legal Aid Society, which
sure.
the board you were on for many years and served as president.
Yeah. Ashley Wiltshire, with whom I'm speaking at this moment, in case the camera doesn't pan on to Ashley, taught me law and religion at the law school, and we got to be friends and stayed in touch. And I'm not sure exactly how I ended up on the board.
I take credit for it.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to give it. And that was a rich time. The early 90s, legal aid was in the Stallman building, and you had your colleague Gordon Bonneman, our good friend, had led efforts to seek justice on a broad basis, including class action matters and multiple client matters, and that ran afoul of prevailing political winds, whether at the state or the national level, or both. And so funding became a challenge in light of that. And I just think about all that pressure and Gordon decided to start the TJC separately, and legal aid went forward, just take care of individual clients. And just navigating those waters was tricky. And maybe knew I how to talk Republican, and so I could help be a voice for those who are less fortunate than we are, in those rooms. And so we did that, and then we moved the office when that lease was up. I guess the Stallman, I don't know if it was going to condos at that time, or we just decided we needed different space, but we moved over to a few blocks downtown to more corporate space, and that was a
In a
big
parking garage.
cultural change at the bottom of a parking garage. But that was very satisfying. And
And
I
then you and
mentioned-
I did some fundraising
you
together.
mentioned Herman Lowenstein, who I told you I had met as a fellow lawyer in the bankruptcy bar representing creditors. The year I was chair, you had the vision for an endowment for legal aid, so we wouldn't be so utterly dependent on the vagaries of, political wins in terms of funding from public entities or the grind of fundraising year after year. And so we said, let's get somebody who can help us get started in a big way. And that was, let me just say, that was the time when $1 million was a lot of money. And we took Herman Lowenstein to lunch and made the pitch. And he said he would do it. And that he would write us a check for $1 million. And the rest of the story is that he did do it. He went back to his office, if not that day, that week, took care of it and put it into his, whether it was in his estate or as a gift at that time. But he's tragically died within days of our lunch and his commitment. But he had put things in order such that the money was appropriated. That got us started. Anyway.
Now, all right, so we've talked about community activity and we've talked a lot about political involvement here and there, but I mean, is there anything else we want to say about that? Or
Sure. Well, that's everybody has their lane of traffic, and that's in terms of what people associate with. Yeah, I think that would be it. And I've said that went back to my earliest years. And, I mentioned Lou Connor. In 1994, I was a 4th year associate at Stokes and Bartholomew, struggling. We hadn't hired Bill Bruce yet. And I wasn't sure I was going to make it. And Don Sundquist was elected governor in 1994. And I said, I'd love to be his legal counsel. And so I didn't know how to even, advocate for such a thing, but I called Lou Connor, and he was at Waller in those years, and he helped, and he made the ask on my behalf, and it didn't happen, and I think that was a merciful, gracious thing. I'm thankful now that it did not happen, but I'm grateful for that kind of friendship from Lou Connor, and I wanted to mention that. You remember those kind of titans, getting to be friends with Charlie Warfield in our small group there in those years. Man, a guy who did big things and did everything the right way. I think about him. In the lobbying business, I think about Dan Elrod, who was at Tribune and then Miller Martin and then Butler Snow as that firm evolved. A guy who, when I was starting, was at the top of his game and was respected and very effective at his work. And he was kind to me when I didn't know anything or anybody. And you remember people like that. So anyway, Dan Elrod is a guy from that period. You asked me about politics, and I got off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I think when I started practicing, I think close to a majority of the state Senate were lawyers. 33 members of the Senate. I would say we probably had 15 lawyers at that time, and we barely have anybody now. And the chairs of both the judiciary committees in the Senate and House are non-lawyers. Doesn't mean you have to have a law degree to know anything or do anything, but I think it helps, and I think that is not an improvement. And that's not a partisan statement, Republican, Democrat, but I'm sorry that there aren't as many lawyers in public service as there were when I started. Not exactly sure I understand why, but that's certainly a different dynamic. You never know. For me, politics ended up being, a portal that allowed me a career. Practicing law, but doing it in a different venue, the state legislature, the executive branch of government, regulatory agencies like the TRA or the Alcoholic Beverage Commission. It's a great place to practice. If anybody young who's were to watch this, and it's just a great way to get an entry into law practice. I think both the lobbying business is wide open. We have the dominant liquor licensing practice in the state with Will Cheek and Rob Prince at Adams and Reese, but I think that's a great area to get in. So I think a lot of lawyers don't understand government relations work, because a lot of our work is fee based and not hourly based, and doesn't involve going to court all the time or reviewing leases or doing transactions, but it certainly calls on the skills that you are taught in law school. And I've enjoyed it very much. Thankful to have those opportunities.
Well, you're still young, Gift, but any thoughts about what you do after your term?
Yeah.
Now as manager will be up in 5 years.
Yeah, that's a good segue. Our articles of partnership require that you be an equity shareholder in order to be a senior manager in the law firm. So managing partner by definition has to be an equity shareholder. And at our firm, the equity shareholders surrender our equity at the end of the year in which we turn 69. So 67, sorry, 67. I should know that. So I'm 62 this year, so I basically have 5 more years. Although the executive committee could relieve me at any moment, but hopefully they won't, and I'll finish out those 5 years. So, I think I'll be 67. I would hope that I would have something to offer professionally after that. I don't play golf, really. I don't shuffleboard. No disrespect to people who do it. I don't, for me, I don't want, I don't want to go move somewhere to some new community on the beach and have to start over again. I want to be in Nashville with all my friends and build on whatever's going on. So, I think one option now would be some type of public service. I think I was one of the reasons I told you, I wanted to trade. I didn't want to work for my dad. I wanted to have a trade, and I wanted to have kids. I wanted to raise a family and be able to educate a family. And I'm thankful that my years in private practice have provided the resources to do that. That I'm happy that has worked out. But now that I'm on the other side of that, there is a sense of, well, I haven't done an extended professional stint in state government. I worked for the embassy there as a young man and did internships. But if I had an opportunity to serve in some capacity at the state level, that'd be attractive. And 5 years, something like that. Go into my early 70s, and then just see how my health holds up. Again, I don't know what I would do in retirement. I'm not afraid of it in terms of everything that defines me gets taken away. But I like to work. Maybe that's the simplest way to address the subject, is that I really like what I'm doing now, and I'm not counting down the days till I can stop doing it. And I hope that I can find something after this that I would feel similarly about. If my children ever elected to get married or have children, that could be an influence. But they go a little slow getting started on that, in case you're watching.
Okay. Well, Gift, thank you. And as I say thank you, one of the words that I've heard from you during this interview over and over is, I'm thankful. Yeah. And it is really so. Yeah. That is really a key, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, our work is hard. The things we have to do are challenging.
But gratitude is important.
But bringing a hopeful spirit that's, Alex Haley would say, find the good and praise it. You do have. I'm hesitant to give a bunch of broad advice, but I just think if you can look for the good, if you can look for something to be thankful for or to observe as a good thing, it just affects your disposition, and that has an aggregating sort of momentum to it. And I'd a whole lot rather be around people like that. And it's easy for me because I've been blessed, including with.
Thank you for this time.
Yeah.